hand you over to Dr. Karen Morris, who is joining us from the University of Cumbria, and she's going to be facilitating a workshop based on developing a research proposal. So over to you, Karen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to sort my computer out a little bit. I'm working across two screens, so it's been a little bit naughty. So just give me 1 second. 1 second. Can I just check which screen people can see?
We can see session outline. Karen, is that the right slide?
Let's go back. Oh, there we go. Is that the beginning now?
Yes, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, my apologies. My apologies. I can't see the Teams slide at the same time, so just do a shout out through the chat box if you need me to correct anything or my slides suddenly disappear. Okay, so what I'm going to be presenting in this workshop is looking at how to actually develop a research proposal. So it follows on quite nicely from what we've just been listening to from Jonathan. So my plan for this session is first to introduce yourself. That's why I've not done it already. Then hopefully the slides we're going to work through are going to help you increase your understanding of your key skills and stages of designing a proposal. In my those people that know me know that I like an idiot's guide style of approach rather than going too much into the complex theory. So hopefully it's aimed at the right sort of level for you guys. We're going to look at, are there any rules? Of course there are rules, but we can look at the key ones of those. Looking at who can help you design a research proposal, and then finally looking at collaboration with research, and also going on to any questions should we have time. I'm sure we will do. So who am I? First of all, and these are in my order of preference, I am first and foremost an occupational therapist. I've worked in mental health since I qualified in the last century, quite a long time ago in the last century. I am quite old now, I feel. And I've worked in mental health, adult, older adult, but my passion is secure mental health, and I've spent a lot of time working in regional secure units, also visited some higher secure units, and worked with people in the community with forensics histories, but that's my passion. As a researcher, to use some of the posh words, I am a social constructionist researcher, and I like heuristic analysis. So that's my preference. So I'm very much a qualitative researcher now. But when reflecting back to when I was a student, my undergraduate dissertation back in the early 90s was looking at different splinting materials that were available then, one of which was called plastazote, if I remember rightly, which is way back in the depths of time these days. My master's dissertation in the late 90s looked at cognitive behavioural group work for older adults with depression, and that used a crossover trial, so still quite quantitative. And then my PhD research looked at occupational engagement for men living in the secure unit I used to work in, and that's very qualitative and used occupational science as the framework rather than occupational therapy. So that's my most recent huge piece of research, as PhDs are. I completed that in 2012. And since then, I've been a PhD supervisor for a number of different projects. So I've got gained experience and knowledge using continuing to use case study work, using IPA, grounded theory, action research, those sorts of things. As an academic, I'm principal lecturer for rehabilitation at the University of Cumbria. So I look after the occupational therapy and physiotherapy teams, and they deliver our pre-registration programs at undergraduate and master's level. I'm also part of the graduate school in terms of teaching and working with our doctoral level students. So the projects I'm currently working with include mental health for kids in a secondary school, applying my occupational engagement framework for people with dementia, looking at an integrated care community over on the west coast of Cumbria, among other projects. So quite a broad range of different methods and methodologies. But that's enough about me, I'm sure. So I want you to think about, just for a second, the key skills. So we've got planning, thinking, reading the theory and the evidence, breaking things down, analysing, interpreting, and reporting. And hopefully you all recognise these as part of the OT process. Or are they part of the research process? One of the key things when I'm working with students and clinicians is just like when you were a student, and I know we've got some students with us during this session, which is great. When you were a student, do you remember how scary the big theory word was? Everything, theory was scary, and it was something you didn't want to talk about or demonstrate any type of understanding about, because then someone was going to challenge you and ask you a more complicated question. We've all been through that process, and for me, in my experience, research is in a very similar position. People don't want to acknowledge that they've got the skills for research because it's scary. But one of the other things that I think is amazing is that when I started my career in the early 90s, I was unusual in the fact that I wanted to then pursue my master's and my PhD. And if there was a research event that was organised, we might have had half a dozen people wanting to participate. And now here we are in 2020 at an event where over 200 people have wanted to take part. People have been turned away from this event because it's so popular. And I think that is one of the most exciting and fascinating things for us as occupational therapists. So we really do need to grasp that feeling of research and remember that research is within our skill set with the right support, but we can all do research. The key things for designing the process are exactly the same key questions that you need to ask as with any piece of academic work or any work that you do with any client or client group. Constantly asking why. Why has this happened? Why do I want to look into this? Who do I need to work with? How do I need to work with this person? How can I investigate this problem? Where is the best place to answer this question? At the moment, we're stuck very much in an online world, but hopefully in the next year we'll be released, as it were, back into some sort of reality. What is it that we want to investigate? And so what? We've got all these interesting things, but so what? What's the impact of this going to be? Whether it's an intervention with a client or whether it's a piece of research. And one of the positives of COVID is that we've been challenged along these lines as clinicians and as researchers. We're having to look at, okay, we need to work with our service users. We can't abandon them. How are we going to do that differently? And that provides us with an amazing opportunity to think about what's the difference between how we're doing it now and how we used to do it. Are there going to be things, and I'm sure there are we actually learning new and better ways of intervening with people, making our services much more accessible and much more convenient for people to access? And are we going to be able to continue those in the future? So, for example, I live in rural West Cumbria. It's the closest hospital to where I live is over 20 miles away in either direction. We have for the whole of Cumbria, we have 3 hospitals in and I think we're the second or third biggest county. So distance truly is an issue. We might have a bus my nearest bus route is a mile away. It's about a 15-minute walk, and that bus may run once an hour. So if I haven't got access to my car, access to services is very different. So there's going to be some positives coming out of the pandemic in terms of what we research, and we can capture that sort of thing within the research that we do. So as we heard from Jonathan, there are different types of research. They all have different rules, as you can imagine. So we've got the literature-based research, so investigating what's already there. And by literature, I'm meaning anything that's in written word. So that's not necessarily just the formal academic papers in the peer-reviewed journals, but there's a whole raft of different things that we can use in terms of blogs, surveys, websites, all those sorts of things. We've also got audit and service evaluation that we've heard a little bit about, but we can use existing pots of data and resources for that. So can we think of potentially we could use Twitter to evaluate how people feel about a different type of survey? It's in the public domain. There's lots of banks of data that are available that people can access either through their organisation, the organisation they work with, or their professional body, for example. There is data waiting to be researched. And then the final type of research is the primary research, the more traditional, going out and talking to people, observing, those sorts of things, doing focus groups. So there's different types of rules around these different types of research. Okay. We've also got tools to help us look at these rules. And I'm not expecting you to be able to read this, but this is just one of the tools that helps you analyse whether you're doing research, service evaluation, a clinical audit, or whether you're just looking at normal practice. They have different rules. So in our first column, the research column, these are the things. This is a tool from the UK Health Research Authority. And if you're doing research within the NHS, you need to follow those guidance. And I've got a couple of links on these slides for you. So that's asking, is this real highfalutin, if you like, research that requires ethical permission? If it meets those boxes, then yes. And there's a really useful tool, decision-making tool on the website as well that can help you answer those questions. Is it a service evaluation? Are you looking at what people think about your service as opposed to changing something? Yeah, and these things don't require to go to the NHS ethics panel, but they may need to go to, and will need to go, have permission from the service, and may need to go through a different organisation's ethics panel. So you just need to really be mindful of what you need to find out about. Are you auditing something? Do your notes, for example, have a set of standards that are lined out? So think about, are all the notes signed within a certain time frame? Those sorts of things. Does everybody have the set? If you've got a prescribed set of assessments that people need to work through as part of their admission or their intervention with your team, are those always carried out? So it's measuring against the service standard. And the final section, type of research, is around usual practice. Is this looking at something broader? You're just investing. What is the status quo? Looking at what happens now. So what are the issues that are happening at the moment as a result of COVID, for example? Looking what is happening now. So much more investigating the evidence that exists already. So stages of research, and you'll see that this little ethics logo turns up on the next few slides, because for me, ethical issues are critical to good quality research and are involved at every single stage of the research. The first thing to do is to identify your topic. What is your topic? What is your broad interest area? So, for example, I'm interested in the experiences of people living in regional secure units. I really enjoy working with those people, and I really want to understand in more depth what it's like for someone living in a secure unit. But what is the specific issue that needs to be investigated? So narrowing that down a little bit further. So what exactly is it about? So for example, for my PhD, I looked at men's experience of living in a particular regional secure unit. So I needed to think about more what element of that I want to work with. So in order to look at that, who do I need to collaborate with? I need to collaborate with the people living in a secure unit, and I need to collaborate with the staff groups that are involved in those sorts of units. Thinking about who can help you. I'm quite comfortable doing qualitative research these days. I've had quite a bit of experience, but if I'm looking at a different methodology, or if I wanted to compare between 2 or 3 different units, I'd be thinking maybe I'm doing more of a quantitative approach. So I might need to go get some help with some statistics, for example. So I need to think about who those people are. I'm very much into getting the people that are being researched, as it were, then being actively involved in the research at every stage. And if you want to get a funding these days, that's an important thing to consider. And it's not just a tick box exercise anymore. It is about involving your participants at every single stage. And we'll come back to that a little bit more. So now, once you know what you want to investigate, what exactly is your question? What exactly do I want to find out about? What I wanted to find out for my PhD is, over a year, how does it change? How does that experience change for those particular people? So, and it's only at this stage, for me, this is when you start thinking about your methodology. So your underpinning philosophy that Jonathan was talking about earlier, is the best way of answering your question using a qualitative approach? Are you looking at the lived experience? Are you looking at having a deep dive into the research area, or are you wanting a broader brushstroke approach that's looking at that might use more quantitative methods, or are you actually looking at, is intervention A better than intervention B using a quantitative approach? So this is only at this point, and for me, it's very much about using the right tool for the job. It's not about thinking, oh, I want to do some surveys. I think I need to do some interviews. You only make the decision about what you're going to do when you know exactly what your question is, and then you'll start thinking about the best way of answering the question. And this is where you might need someone who's got a bit more experience with research to help you question that, using those questions that we looked at much earlier on. These questions here, why, so what, who, with, these questions, these are critical at all the different stages. And if the more time you can put into, and the more depth you can design your proposal, the smoother your research will run when you actually come to do your research. So it's really worth investing the time to get your proposal right. So once you've identified the best way of answering the question, think about your objectives. Are you just going to be looking at intervention A as opposed to intervention B? So an example I use with students is, shall we do a comparison for looking at a hand exercise with people? Is it better to do a regular routine of different hand exercises with people with a particular condition, or are they better off doing some baking, for example? Comparing those two interventions and thinking, okay, what we're going to do is do some measurements, and we're going to compare the measurements for people that have done 6 weeks of exercises as opposed to 6 weeks of bread making, for example. We can compare those two by using the measurements and use that at a quantitative level. But we may also want to know, are people, which do people carry out, which is actually the more effective long term, not just in terms of if we're at the actual end of those 6 weeks, but if we want to think in a few months' time. So we may tag on some qualitative work, because it may be that you can get those hands moving quite readily by having focused time with a therapist. But do people carry on doing those interventions to help continue that improvement without the therapist there? So, and thinking about why that happens. So I don't know about you, but if I work with a team of physios, if they give me some exercises for something that hurts, I'm not actually that good at carrying out those exercises. So there's another question there, there's a supplementary question there about the quality of that intervention. The exercises may be perfect, but I'm not perfect. So there may be some qualitative research about finding out why I don't do those exercises, and having a conversation with me may be a better way of doing that than asking me to complete a survey, because you want to ask those supplementary questions. So if you need clear objectives, just like you do in practice when you're working with someone and you think about what are we going to achieve together here, what am I going to help you with, and then you know that you can come back and you can measure against those objectives to see how well your study or your intervention has gone. Then you think about your tools. So the key tools that you have is the measurement of A versus B. So you've got things like surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations are the key ways of finding things out. So what is the best tool to do that? And do you need a combination of tools? If you're doing a questionnaire, for example, does a questionnaire already exist that you can use, which will then help you contribute to the knowledge base around that questionnaire? So, for example, if you're looking at improvements in depression, could you use the hospital depression scale, for example, as one of your measures? That it's a standardized tool. Don't recreate and invent a new wheel if there's something there that can help you. It's also critical at this point to plan how you want to analyze your findings at the same time as choosing your tools and sample, because there's nothing worse. It's sort of like design a questionnaire, for example. You think, okay, half a dozen people are going to fill it in, that'll be all right, I'll work out what to do with it later. You may have a really strong response rate, and you'll always have a little, especially if you've got less experience with research, you'll always have a bit of a panic of, oh my goodness, I've got all this data in now, what am I going to do with it? So plan what you want to do with your data at the same time as planning how you're going to collect your data, because then it'll help you refine what you need to collect, what tools you need to use to answer your question, but also you've got some sort of framework in order to analyze it. So, but that doesn't mean that has to be the way you analyze it. You may be conducting some interviews, and you think it's going to be quite a basic analysis, but you end up having some really rich conversations, and you can then increase the depth of that analysis. And think about there's lots and lots of resources out there about different ways of analyze, and lots of books that take you through the step-by-step ways to do your analysis. And it's also really good to, again, go back to the questions of these questions on the wheel to help you with your analysis. Question yourself. And what I found in my research career is that when you're actually living and breathing and working in a service, sometimes it's quite hard to listen to what your service users are telling you about their experiences of that service. So supervision can be really useful to help you truly listen to what people are saying, and then responding to that within your work. So you've got a good idea at this stage of what you want to do and how you're going to go about it. So think about who needs to give permission for this research. If you're doing a literature review, no one needs to give you permission for that. But if you're wanting to do primary research, you may well need permission from the service that you're doing it, the management from that service, the R&D department of the organisation where that service is based. You may need NHS ethics or social services ethics, or the permission and follow the ethical permissions of a charity that you may be working alongside. So you need to work out who that is, and that's easier these days because you can generally look at different organisations' websites, and they will talk you through that process, or at least give you a contact person to talk to. Then think about your timescale for your research. You've put a lot of effort into this proposal by this stage, so think about how you're going to gather your data, the timescale you need for that, and include your writing up within that. Make sure you've got plenty of time for your analysis and writing up, so you can do a good quality piece of work and you can complete the piece of work, because there's so much research these days that just is started, the data's gathered, and then it sits on the shelf, and that's such a waste. All the way through thinking about the ethical issues that impact. Is this the right way? Is this it might not be the best way to collect the data. So, for example, back in the 60s, there was a research project that was carried out that they wanted to find out what university students did in their bedrooms. So they hid researchers underneath students' beds, believe it or not, because their argument was that if they knew they were being observed, they would behave differently. However, that obviously has significant ethical issues around it. So think about the ethics, and again, get help and support around gathering that information, seeking the support, making sure that your research is ethical from the perspective of your service users, the people you're researching with, your participants, but also from your perspective. Are you being kept safe? What are the support mechanisms for you? So part of the tools that you'll be developing as you do research is around the data collection, lone worker policies, potentially debriefing your participants, those sorts of things. It's all about protecting you and your participants, making sure that your questions that you ask within your tool are not biased. So they're not all focused towards the negative side of a particular thing or the positive side. There's a balance there, those sorts of things. So a simple way of writing up a research proposal is to follow some simple headings. And headings are always good for these sorts of things rather than trying to write an essay. When you're pulling together a proposal, why have you chosen? Look at the introduction, give a summary of what the project is, what's the background literature around that, so a bit of a justification of why you've got this little gap that you're wanting to investigate. For your actual proposal, why are you doing it the way you're doing it? Who are you going to talk to, your sample? What's the process going to be? How are you going to collect the data, both the method and the process for doing that? How are you going to analyse? Thinking about the research governance, so that's all about who needs to give permission, protecting the confidentiality of your participants, those sorts of things, and thinking about rigour and bias. So if you're a quantitative researcher, that's things like validity and reliability. If you're using qualitative research, that's looking at authenticity, trustworthiness, credibility, those sorts of things. And then also within your appendices, pop in some things about draft ethics, draft questions, those sorts of things to think about how you're going to carry it out. And if you are going to be needing ethics, do your ethics proposal, complete your ethics forms at the same time as your research proposal, because the two things work hand in hand with each other, and they can really help you develop a really good piece of research. So, who can help you? Most of all, your participants at every single stage of your research. There's, like I say, if you're wanting to seek funding, it's critical that you actively and genuinely involve participants at every stage. So what is the question? You might be interested in a particular question, but are they interested in, is that an important question from their perspective? They may want to tweak the question. If you're doing something like action research, you may well be helping them to learn how to research themselves as you go along and building the research question together. there are panels that you can take your ideas to explore whether this is research that's potentially useful and interesting from a participant's perspective. How do they think? What do they think about the way you're wanting to gather your data? Do they have different ideas about the best way of gathering that data? It's really valuable all the way through the process. I'm aware that we're running short of time. The research design service is really useful. You don't have to be working in the NHS to make use of the research design service. Every region in the UK has one. I'm sorry for our international colleagues that are joining us. I don't know what you have within your countries, but I'm sure there will be something. So just explore the websites for your area. If where you work is a larger organisation, it's likely to have some sort of research and development department. It might not be called that, but they are really good people to contact. They have, especially if you're wanting to do service evaluation or audits, they can do with that. They may be able to help you access some of the banks of data that's available. And look outside your own organisation. Who else is there around you that can help you, who may be interested in contributing to this research, supporting you and developing it and working with you in collaboration, whether that's third sector, universities, partner organisations, professional bodies, different interest groups, etc., etc. There's a whole raft of different people that are just really keen to work collaboratively together. And that's the key. Collaboration is key. Do not ever these days try doing research on your own. It's tough on your own, and it won't be as good if you're working as your own as if you work in collaboration with either people within your organisation or outside your organisation. So, time for questions, thoughts, or comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys. And we can.
Fab. Thank you so much for that, Karen. That was really, really informative. We've had a lot of comments on Twitter about how useful that content's been. We've just got 2 questions. So the first one is from Rachel Coates. She is wondering about the research process for developing and testing outcome measures and whether there is a particular process or whether it would be measure specific.
There are specific processes and protocols for designing and testing it. So a bit like the randomized control methods that we're hearing about now in terms of the COVID vaccines, they are different methods of testing those out. So I would contact your local research department to help you design, to look at what they are for your particular organisation. And also your local university may well have some expertise there. Or if you're a member of Motion, I know the Motion Group has expertise in terms of designing protocols. So, for example, Joanne Inman, who's one of the leads for Motion, her PhD was around designing a protocol for occupational therapy interventions for people with schizophrenia. So she's got that sort of background there. So again, make sure, just because you don't live in a university anymore, doesn't mean that you're not, you can't make use of those universities. Universities want to do research. They want to work in collaboration with the people that are part of their wider community.
Fantastic, thank you. And then there's one further question from Aisling Butler. She's asked, does every research proposal need to include a literature review?
I would say yes, but it doesn't have to be a systematic literature review. It's a background scoping review. And if you don't have access to an organisational library and lots of journals and things like that, look on things like Google Scholar. It's freely available, or ResearchNet. They're freely available areas where researchers put their research. Universities often also have copies of people's research in the last draft form. So sometimes if you are wanting to access a particular article in a particular journal, you might not have access because of the embargo and the copyright around that. But if it's written by someone who's attached to a university, if you contact that university's they have what's called a repository, where academics now put the final version, pre-formatted version of their research, so you can look at it for free rather than waiting until you can access or paying to access the journal. But Google Scholar is a really good place to start looking at that. And I quite often start my own research proposals and scoping using Google Scholar, not Google itself, because there's and not Wikipedia. Google Scholar is a more academic format, but again, always ask those questions and challenge the quality of the research that you're looking at.
Fantastic, thank you. And then I think we've got time just for one more question. There's a question from Taiwu Giwa, who's asked, collaboration is not always possible for master's or PhD dissertation. How does one go around it?
Okay, I would dispute that. Collaboration is a key part of any research. The difference with a master's or a PhD is that you have to demonstrate your ability to conduct that research. So, and it has to remain your research, but you can still collaborate with people on different aspects. So, for example, I examined a action research dissertation that was co-created with the participants, and part of the research and part of the dissertation was about how those participants became active members of the research team. So collaboration is critical, really, but if you're writing it for an academic piece of work, the academic writing has to be your own. That's the key difference.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for that presentation, Karen. That was fantastic.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry I probably spoke a bit fast for some people, but we had quite a lot to get through.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. I can see that there are a few more comments in the chat box. What we'll do is we'll copy and paste them into kind of a few of the questions that we didn't have the opportunity to get answered today, but we'll circulate the answers to you with all the support and documentation at the end of the event. So thank you, everybody.
And just to quickly answer Linda's question about best way of involving service users, there's a couple of links on my slides that are going to get circulated that you can, as a good starting point for that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Karen. So we'll go on to the next workshop now, which is going to be workshop 3 that's